Your courage today has truly moved us all.
Welcome to Grace Mitchell Stories, where every tale reveals the power of kindness, courage, and hope. Today's story will take you inside a courtroom, where a young girl's tears carried more weight than evidence, and where a judge's response left everyone speechless. The courtroom was a world of polished wood and stern silence. High windows let in shafts of morning light that fell across rows of benches. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, and the shuffle of documents filled the room. At the front, the judge's bench stood tall like a throne of law, its very presence commanding order. This was not just any trial. It was one that had captured the town's attention. Reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing, headlines already being drafted. Inside, people whispered nervously, waiting for the case to begin. And in the very front row sat Emily. She was only 10 years old, her legs too short to reach the floor, her small shoes swinging above the bench. Her hair, the color of chestnut, was tied back in two neat braids, but her face carried the weight of someone far older. She clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest, its fur faded from years of hugs. Emily's father, Sergeant Michael Hayes, had been a soldier, a man who had served with honor overseas. But he was gone now, lost to an accident that had left his family shattered. And today, Emily was in court because her future was being decided. Across the aisle sat her mother, a woman struggling with demons of her own, accused of neglect and unfit parenting. Behind her stood lawyers, folders stacked with evidence and accusations. The state had stepped in, demanding custody, claiming Emily deserved better. The little girl sat quietly, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She didn't want legal jargon or fancy words. She wanted her dad. She wanted the life that had been taken from her too soon. And as the bailiff called the court to order, her small voice whispered only to her Teddy, "Daddy, I wish you were here." The judge entered, Judge Reynolds, a man known for his stern fairness. His robe swept as he sat, adjusting his glasses. His face was unreadable, carved with lines of years spent in law. He tapped his gavel lightly. Court is now in session. The lawyers began. One spoke of the mother's failures, listing missed school days, empty refrigerators, bills unpaid. Another countered, pointing to love, to second chances, to promises of change. Their voices filled the room, clashing like swords. While Emily's eyes flicked back and forth, lost in a storm of adult words, she clutched the teddy tighter, and then a tear slipped down her cheek. The courtroom noticed. The whispering stopped. Even the lawyers faltered for a moment. The sight of a soldier's daughter silently crying was more powerful than any argument. Judge Reynolds saw it too. He leaned back in his chair, his stern gaze softening ever so slightly. But he said nothing yet. The testimony continued. A social worker spoke, describing Emily's loneliness, her nights of hunger, her drawings of soldiers and stars. A teacher added her own words, saying Emily was bright but often distracted, sketching pictures of her father in class. Each sentence painted the portrait of a child adrift. Emily sat through it all, silent tears dripping onto the teddy bear's fur. Finally, when her name was called, she was asked to step forward. She walked to the witness stand slowly, her small hands trembling. The bailiff helped her climb onto the seat, adjusting the microphone. Her feet dangled again, just as they had at the bench. The lawyer's voice was gentle. "Emily, do you understand why you're here today?" She nodded softly. "Because people are deciding where I should live." "And how do you feel about that?" Her voice cracked, scared. The lawyer pressed on. "Do you love your mother?" Emily hesitated. Her eyes dropped.
Yes.
"But she forgets about me sometimes." The room went still. The mother shifted uncomfortably, tears forming in her own eyes. The lawyer asked, "And what about your father?" Her lips trembled. She clutched the teddy tighter. "He was a soldier. He always came back. Until he didn't." Her voice broke, and the dam of her tears burst. She sobbed openly, her small shoulders shaking. "I just want him. I want my dad." The courtroom held its breath. Grown men wiped their eyes. The jury shifted, unable to look away. Even the stenographer paused, her hands frozen above the keys. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat, but his voice was softer than before. "Emily," he said gently, "why do you hold that teddy bear so close?" She sniffed. "Because it was his. He gave it to me before he left. He said, 'Whenever you miss me, hug this, and I'll be right there.'" The judge's hand tightened around his gavel, his eyes glistening despite his efforts to remain composed. At that moment, the law, the arguments, the evidence all seemed to shrink before the raw truth of a child's grief. The lawyers tried to continue, but the air had shifted. The power in the room now belonged to Emily's tears. Finally, after hours of testimony, the judge called for a recess. The room emptied, people whispering, reporters scribbling furiously, but Judge Reynolds remained seated, staring at the little girl who sat quietly, stroking the teddy bear's worn fur. When court resumed, the judge's gavel struck. This court has heard many arguments. He began. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that hadn't been there before. But there is a truth that cannot be ignored, a truth carried not in documents or testimonies, but in the tears of a child. All eyes locked on him. This young girl, he continued, has already lost more than most of us will ever understand. A father who gave his life in service, a childhood touched by sacrifice. What she needs now is not more battles, not more pain, but stability, love, and respect. The mother wept openly. Emily's small hand reached toward her, uncertain. The judge leaned forward. This court is not here to punish, but to protect. And today, I will not let this child become lost in the cracks of the system. His voice shook slightly, but he pressed on. Emily Hayes will remain in her mother's custody, but under strict supervision and with support to ensure she is cared for. Counseling will be provided, as well as community aid. He paused, his eyes softening as he looked directly at Emily. And as for you, young lady, you will never be alone. Your father's service will not be forgotten, and neither will your courage. This court will make sure of that. The room erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked, others moved, but one thing was undeniable: the judge's words had carried a weight no one expected. Emily blinked through her tears, her voice a whisper. Thank you. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned. But even as people rose, even as the case closed, the moment lingered. The judge's response had not only settled the trial, it had shaken the room to its core. For in that courtroom, amid the echoes of law and order, humanity had spoken louder. Weeks later, Emily began counseling. The community rallied, bringing meals, clothes, and kindness to the Hayes family. The judge himself quietly checked in, ensuring his promise was not forgotten. And though Emily still hugged the teddy bear at night, she began to smile again, a small, brave smile that carried her father's strength within it. The story spread beyond the courthouse, reminding people everywhere that sometimes justice is not just about rules, it's about compassion. And sometimes the most powerful judgment is not written on paper but felt in the heart. But the story didn't end there. A month after the ruling, the local Veterans Association held a gathering to honor Sergeant Hayes. Emily was invited as the guest of honor. She wore a simple dress, her teddy bear clutched in her arms. When her name was called, she walked timidly to the stage. One of her father's old comrades handed her a folded flag. Your father was a hero, he said, his voice trembling. And today, you reminded us that his bravery lives on in you. The room filled with applause. Emily's cheeks flushed, but for the first time in months, her smile was genuine, unburdened. She hugged the flag and Teddy close, whispering softly, I'll make you proud, Daddy. In the audience, Judge Reynolds watched quietly, unseen by most. His stern face softened as he turned to leave, knowing the little girl's future was brighter because one moment of compassion had guided his hand. So remember this. In a world that often measures worth by evidence and numbers, the tears of a child can still move mountains. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace Mitchell Stories, where tales of kindness, courage, and hope come alive every week. Together, let's keep reminding the world that compassion is the greatest law of all.